Good afternoon, folks. Thanks for taking some time to join Ian and I today. This webinar that we're doing today is the first of a series of focused webinars. We're going to talk about a few of the things that we believe we can help you with in today's somewhat uncertain market. Today, Ian is going to show you how Passport Manufacturing will be able to help you increase profitability through better cost management. So without any further ado or rambling from me, here you go, Ian.
Thanks, Dave, and thanks, folks, for joining us today. Yeah, indeed, today's webinar is called Improve Profitability with PBS Manufacturing. We're going to explore some different ways that PBS Manufacturing can help you do just that. As it turns out, the timing of this is perfect with some of the instability and uncertainty that's cropped up over the last several weeks. Let's go ahead and get started. Let's start with the question at the top of the screen here. Do you feel like your profits should be higher than they are? I know a lot of people do. We get to talk to a lot of different manufacturing companies all over the country. Many of them are kind of, running with some sort of codged together systems. Maybe it's a couple of different things. Maybe they're using an accounting system with Excel or some, database-based thing somebody wrote years back, and they're kind of stumbling along with that stuff. Very often, what they find is they lack meaningful visibility of some key aspects of their operation. Profitability, or at least cost, it tends to be one of those, and we'll get into a little bit more of that as we move along. I'll give you some examples. But I then ask you this: how do you know how you're doing? Is it best guess? Right? Are we just kind of taking a best guess? Okay, well, let's see. And if so, maybe you go down to the second to last one on this list and wait until month end, quarter end, year end, when you're looking in your general ledger to figure out how well you did for that particular period. If that's what you're doing, you're entirely too late. You're hurting yourself as an organization. Are you tracking costs in spreadsheets? A lot of people try to do that. It gets very complicated. It tends to be fraught with errors because you're manually tabulating stuff up and dropping it into these things. And it's not a great way to do it. A, it's not timely. And B, often it's inaccurate. Do you include labor and burden into your costs? A lot of folks don't. Some folks will fudge it. I'm actually working with a client right now who is working on implementing the manufacturing suite in their company, and they kind of fudge it in the bill of material. They've created some items for labor, and they try to get some basic labor in there, but those were all best guess. It goes right back to that first one up at the top. They were best guess. They weren't rooted in any kind of reality. They're going through the process right now of building out what I like to call the cost picture, and we'll be seeing an example of that in just a minute. Again, do you wait until the general ledger to determine this? A lot of folks do. As I said, you're too late if that's the way you're doing it. It's too late to do anything about it, and you really don't know much about what's going on underneath, which brings me to the last point. Do you know which products are overperforming and which ones are underperforming? If you're not using something like PBS Manufacturing to manage your costs, the answer is likely no. Even if you think you do, the answer is likely no. You probably really don't. And I'm going to tell you right now, you hear about the 80-20 rule and all different facets of life. It truly tends to apply here as well. And what I mean by that is likely you got about 20% of your products that underperform. You got another 20% that overperform, and they balance each other out. That's great. You'll see that in the general ledger as we're doing fine. We're hitting the margins we expect to hit. What if you could identify those underperforming items? Well, now we're in the game of increasing our profitability, either through restructuring our pricing to get our margins on track, maybe dropping products where they're literally costing us money to sell, or finding better ways to make them, and thus getting to those margin positions that we want to be in on all of our products. Leave the ones that are overperforming alone. Let them continue to overperform. Let all the average ones stay where they're at. Monitor them, but let those stay where they're at. But bring that 20% into the profitability range that we're expecting. And again, you're going to increase your overall profitability as an organization. All that said, it doesn't take a magician to better manage your costs. It just takes tools. It takes the right tools to allow you to do this. So PBS Manufacturing, it can help you get a far better understanding of your product costs. So I mentioned a couple of minutes ago, the cost picture. We can help you develop a complete cost picture. What you're seeing here is actually a little screenshot from Item Master. We'll be looking at some of these today. In here, you see a breakdown. That breakdown consists of total material cost. In other words, all those raw materials, purchased items that we use to make something. Our total outside processing costs. Maybe you got to set something out for heat treating or anodizing or whatever. There you go. We can pick up that cost as well. How much labor is involved in building this particular product? And then how much burden, which gives us a total unit cost here. In this case, it's $118 and change. So that gives us a complete cost picture, not just a lump number, but it shows us where our costs are coming from. And it gives us some back-end information to be able to research why those costs are what they are. Maybe they're wrong. Well, this gives us some insight into why they might be. This can also provide us with some more advanced cost tracking tools, which we're going to talk about today. Specifically, we have what's called the Manufacturing Job Costing module. It's optional. You don't have to use it. The base system can provide us with what we saw on the prior screen. But what this does is it does allow us to track costs on a job-by-job basis. It gives us the ability to see how much it really costs us to produce something on a particular job versus what we thought it should cost us. That's a big deal, and I'll get into an example of that with a customer that I got to work with to help them out with that, and it was significant for their operation. So let's get into it. Let's take a brief look at how this works inside of the system. So I am currently in the Inventory Management module, or what we refer to as IM, and I'm going to go into the Item Masters, Enter. And in here, we have a series of different items. Some are purchased, some are manufactured, and so on. In this case, we're going to look at a manufactured good. It's a wagon. In fact, you're going to note that those costs, let me grab my little annotation tool here. This is the total unit cost column that we saw. This is the one we were looking at. It provides us with that breakdown of material, outside processing, labor, and burden costs. For a manufactured good, this is important because these are all important aspects. In fact, sometimes, in this case, it's definitely the case, the labor and burden is going to far exceed the overall cost of material that goes into producing something. And that's a big deal because we're trying to set pricing and we're trying to track some sort of an accurate cost of sales. And if we do not have all aspects of our costs built in, one or both of those is going to be inaccurate. So to expand this out a little bit, I'll show you a bigger section here. For a manufactured good, we're going to see what's called unit costs at this level, as well as our total unit costs. And what's the difference? Well, we're going to see some of the infrastructure that supports developing these in just a couple of minutes. But the reality is this. For a manufactured good, at this level, which is on the left side, we're simply contributing labor and burden to the process. So we're taking purchased raw materials, maybe sub-assemblies, whatever. We're taking all these things and we're doing something with them. Maybe we're assembling something, slipping it into a box and shipping it out the door, which is essentially what we're doing here. There may be a number of production steps involved in actually doing this. This one's pretty straightforward. But all we're doing is we're adding value to those lower level components. So in this case, we're adding 6 cents in labor and 8 cents in burden. So when we look to the right and we look at the total labor cost and the total burden cost, well, now we see a $32 and change and a $44 and change respectively. Well, that tells us something. That tells us that we've got information coming from somewhere else up and through here. And specifically what that's telling us is we have sub-assemblies down below this which have their own labor and burden that they're contributing to the overall cost picture here. How do we know what those are? Well, let's take a look at a couple things real fast. First, I want to show you, just so I can drill through quick and easy, this is the bill of material, or what we call the product structure for that particular wagon. And it's pretty basic, right? We run down the description column. We got a wagon body, we've got 4 wheels, we have a couple of axles, and so on, right? Pretty basic. If we look down the center column, we see it's a P or an M, right? And that indicates it's purchased or manufactured. There's one other one down here. It's called a transient. If you're familiar with the term phantom, great. I'm not going to get into that in this case. We're going to focus on the purchased and manufactured products. So this would be a sub-assembly. If I drill into that, I can see its components. it's got another sub-assembly underneath that, so I can drill down a little bit further and see there's some steel involved with that one. Here we've got some hose, some paint, some primer, along with those wheel halves that were made out of that steel. And then obviously we're moving all that up and into the wheels in our top level assembly. So the idea here is I have several different assemblies underneath my parent one, and I have lots of raw materials associated with these down and through. Now another piece of this puzzle is what's called the routing. And what the routing tells us is, to make this, there's 2 steps. Do this one, then do that one. And here are the times associated with it. We can define time per piece, pieces per time. I won't, again, get into the weeds on this, but the idea now is I can say, hey, look, in order to make this, I've got steps. And each of these steps has time associated with it. Each of these steps is also linked to what we call a work center. What a work center is, here, let me just highlight that for you real quick. What a work center is it's a machine or group of machines capable of performing a similar task. Person or group of people also capable of performing a similar task. So in this case, this is my assembly work center. When I used to work in manufacturing, I was an electrical assembler. That would have been one work center for our company. We had a machine shop. Now the machine shop might have been a department, but the work centers would have been several. There would have been one for our 2 CNC machines, one for our 5 bridge ports, one for our 2 lathes, and so on. So you kind of get the idea. Each work center has its own cost basis. In other words, it has a standard labor cost and a standard burden cost for the work center. Those are then utilized through what we call a cost roll-up process to calculate all of that cost picture back in the item master. And what those roll-ups do is they allow us to take the information in our bill of material as well as the information in our routings to get our labor and burden, and to draw all of those up and through and bring us back to here, where we have our overall costs. It's pretty cool. Again, it's pretty basic, but it's also one of those points when we first start implementing PBS manufacturing with somebody who's never really used a true manufacturing system before. A lot of them are getting by, like I say, a distribution system, basic inventory system, whatever, and they never really had the ability to go this far. When they build their first bill and they build out their work centers and they create their first routings and roll up their cost, it's typically either the aha or oh no moment. And more often than not, it's like, oh no, really? That's what it cost me to make this? I'll share a story with you. There was a manufacturing company. They were a sign manufacturer. Well, they were struggling financially. Couldn't figure out why. So I kept telling them, look, let's use this. So he gave me a young man they had brought on. He's actually a marketing major. He had picked him up as an intern. I had hired him after his internship, and I started training him. He ended up working with the production manager to start to bring in all of the key information that I was just talking about, particularly on the labor side of things. Accounting helped him with numbers for his work centers, and they already had their basic bills of materials in place, not that they were really using them at that point. So he fleshed all this stuff out, and we did a mass cost roll-up, and then cherry-picked out a couple of items to sit down in a meeting with the owner. One of them was stop signs. They had sold like 200 of these things to the New York City, and you would think it wouldn't be that difficult to understand what your costs were on these things. I just cherry-picked this out of recent sales history. We're going to use some fictitious numbers here. They sold these signs to the state of New York for like $6 a piece. The problem was they cost them close to $7 to make. So as I presented this to the owner and 3 or 4 other actual examples that were in the same boat, he looks at me and he says, it can't cost me that much to make that. If it does, I don't belong in this business. Here's the sad part. He was right. He was right. They had neglected their costing as an organization for so long that they were in terrible financial shape, and he couldn't get good terms on anything. He was overpaying for his raw materials. His labor was his labor. You know, he wasn't changing that. But he was overpaying for raw materials because nobody wanted to sell to him because he was a slow pay, and they didn't want to deal with that. So if they were going to, they were going to charge extra for it. He was right. After allowing it all to settle in, he came to the conclusion that there was a couple of aspects of his business that were profitable. So he sold off all the other stuff, and he downsized into a much smaller business that was actually turning a profit. Long way around, But that's where the importance of costing comes into play. And very often, folks don't pay attention until too late in the process. And they get caught in a position like that where they are in financial trouble, and they really don't know why. Didn't have to do it. Could have been headed off much sooner. Show you one last thing from here, and then we're going to move on. We're going to run a report real quick. It's called a costed summarized bill of material. Looking at the price of this, I see a $118 wagon, and that sounds kind of expensive to me because that's just the cost. That's not even the selling price in this case. So we haven't even been able to set a good price yet. But I'm going to go ahead and run this costed summarized bill of material, which is going to break down. It's going to collapse that bill of material down, that complex bill, collapses it down into a linear report for us, and it shows us all of the costs associated with producing this thing. And I can tell you, a couple of them jump right out at me. And the big one, I'm going to highlight for you real quick here, is, make sure I'm on the right one. Where'd you go? There it is. This one here. Item 3000. It's contributing $15.85 to the cost of this. And that is solely in labor and overhead, or labor and burden, for 2 axles. What is this? Well, it's a piece of 1/4-inch rod that's getting cut to length, and a couple of holes are being drilled in it. That's it. That's ridiculous. So by building out my costs based on what I think I know, rolling them up, now I get to see this. And this says, okay, we got some work to do here. We need to go review the routing for this particular item, and let's figure out why it's costing us $15.85. Is that real or not? And it's a similar thing up here with the wheel halves. Now, there's 8 of them, but still, they're just a little bit of steel being punched out of a blank. And they're being tack welded together and painted. It's minutes. Shouldn't cost me $37 and change. So immediately I've highlighted a couple of very important things that we should go look at to try and figure out why this wagon's costing us $118. I'm going to do some time studies, and I'm going to come back, and I'm going to figure out if I need to make some changes. If so, I'll make those changes, re-roll my costs. And if it's just simply real, well, now I know that I need to set my price for this accordingly, so that we are ensuring that we're making a reasonable margin on this. Even if I'm willing to eat a little bit, I don't want to eat too much. If I've got a specific margin I want to hit, I want to figure out how I can hit it. If necessary, maybe it means outsourcing a process because we just can't do it efficiently in-house. So there you go. There's the importance of doing our basic costing. And it's critical to have that infrastructure, right? The items, the bills of materials, the work centers, and the routings in order to be able to establish this stuff. I'll show you one thing real quick. So I talked about those cost roll-ups. I created an item the other day, and it has no cost as of right now. Let's confirm I did it correctly. I did not. We're going to indicate it's a manufactured item, and we're going to come back to this screen because I want to show you how this cost roll-up process works. And we're going to start by watching the left side, the unit cost at this level. I'm going to run a tool real quick. We're going to go, and I would normally move straight forward through this, but I'm going to come back so we can compare and look at some things. So there's our routing. What we want to do now is we want to do update our item labor and burden. In this case, I'm just going to do it for this one item. I'll round it to the penny. We'll say we generally make 100 of these as a default run quantity so we can amortize our setup costs. We're going to click OK. We're going to click OK. And actually, we'll just print the report to disk. Now it's updated our item. Normally, I would just do a total cost roll-up. So I refresh that real quick, and we see on this left side, we are now contributing 95 cents in labor and $1.19 in overhead or burden. But we have not yet changed the costs on the right side. So all that first run does is it just updates the labor and burden costs at this level for any item or group of items you run it for. And then we just do a quick cost roll-up. It's called the total cost roll-up. You can choose to include scrap allowances in this and so on. We're just going to click OK. And this little guy is going to cost us $164 and change to produce. We refresh that, and there it is, our 164.87. Where are those costs coming from? No big deal. Run our cost at summarized bill. It'll show us, and this is just a random little bill of material I threw together the other day for this. So I added a bunch of the stuff that's involved with the wagons plus some other things, and that's where it's coming up with all of this. At this point, now I can set a selling price for it. Now I can say, hey, look, we're ready to sell this thing. We've got this thing all fleshed out, so we're going to assign it to our miscellaneous parts category here, and I could add a markup to it. So if it's 1.6, there you go, it's 263.79. Or I can just put in a number that I would like to sell it at. But at this point, we have an item that we have some idea of how much it costs us based on some reality. And we have documentation of that in the form of our bill of material and our routing. And as product costs change, or as our labor costs change, a quick re-roll, and boom, we've got the latest cost reflected in our item, and then can set prices accordingly. So pretty big deal. Even just working in the base portion of the system, it's a pretty big deal. It provides us with the ability to really begin to see our costs, to visualize them and see where they're coming from. What are they based on? Is that information accurate or not? Now, I mentioned we can take it to another level. We'll just talk a few minutes about this. This is manufacturing job costing. I grabbed a screenshot from a report. I've actually got one open. I'll show you in a minute. Basically, manufacturing job costing will live in the background. It's an optional module. You don't have to have it. But if you do, it'll live in the background. It's to touch it, to leverage it. What's it doing? Well, it's going to begin to collect information on a job-by-job basis. And it's going to collect that information from an actuals perspective. How much did I really issue in material? How much labor was really collected through shop floor control to produce these things? And it now gives us a real comparative. And I pre-ran the report here just for time for one of our jobs in here. And you'll see there's a bunch of what we call shop orders inside of that job. So I'm producing the wagon bodies. I got another one because I've got multiple finished products mixed into this. But I'm producing all these different little pieces here as individual shop orders underneath this job. And the one up at the top is the most reflective, where it shows us, look, we collected, our estimate was $49.12. My actual, let me grab my little annotation tool. So my estimated cost was $127.31. Well, we anticipated $49 and change in materials to make this quantity of these, which would be 10. $34 in labor, $34 in burden. Well, our reality is it only costs us $40.50, $12 and change, $15 and change, for a total of $68, which is about half. Well, is that a real problem? Maybe, maybe not. If we look over to the left, we see our quantity ordered versus our quantity received. We only received 5. So we only received half of them. $68, we're right there. So we're looking okay on this. And then it breaks down for us the totals in a few different ways for the order quantity by unit and so on. But the idea here is it's real numbers. This is real information we gathered. It gives us that similar breakdown, but it gives it to us for each shop order within the job as well as the overall job. But we create that job. We can create it if we're in a make-to-order situation right from the sales order. And if so, we can see what was billed out on it versus what we collected for total materials on a given order to see profitability for that specific job for the order related to it. So this is where manufacturing job costing takes us to the next level. And again, it's without a lot of additional effort because it can be very automated if we're using it in conjunction with the shop floor control and the rest of the system. So the point here is we give you the ability to generate this stuff quickly and easily. In fact, you know what? I am going to take 1 second. We're going to roll through this. I'm just creating a quick sales order here. Assume I'm a make-to-order company, importer and all, and we'll order that wagon. I'm going to order whatever. We'll order 5 units, and I'm going to tell it to create the shop order to produce it down here on the lower right. We're going to click Save. Answer a couple of questions. It's created the shop order now. Because I'm using the job costing module, it says, hey, do you want to create a job cost master? Absolutely, I do. And do I want to post billings to the job? As I just showed you, that's where it's going to land. It's on that costing report. So now I've created a sales order line by answering a few questions. I've also created a shop order and a job master to cost it under. If we were to go through an explosion process with this where we allocate the materials, and in fact, I'm going to actually do what's called a multiple level explosion. Yes, I'm moving quickly through this. Essentially, it takes and creates subassembly orders as necessary for the lower level components. So now we have a bunch of shop orders in addition to the parent one we sold on the sales order. So we got to make that body, the wheels, and so on. So just like that, I've created several shop orders. And the last thing I might do for the shop order is if I'm using the shop floor control, actually I want to do it from here. Give me 1 second. I'm going to come into here. We're going to go out to the release routing operations. And I can release just this one, or I can release several. I'll just release this one for now, keep it quick and easy. But you'll notice that it'll automatically create my cost estimates for a costed job. And that's the point. When I use it with shop floor control, by checking that box, I'm actually building cost estimates as well. So just like that, we've created the order. It's all set for processing. I can generate paperwork, send it to production, and as they start reporting stuff against it, be it labor or issuing materials, we're collecting costs against that job. And we're going to be able to compare that to what we thought it should cost us based on that cost picture in the item master. All right, so that's just a little quick show and tell. Let's get to some conclusions here, and then I'll open up for questions. So PBS Manufacturing, this is an ERP solution that provides us with the tools we need to manage our costs. We can build that accurate cost picture before we ever even start making something, right? We can actually flesh that stuff out based on our understanding of how we produce it, how long it takes us to do these things, and what materials are involved. We can incorporate labor and overhead into our product costs. Again, so many people aren't doing that. I mentioned the one I'm working with right now. They're working their way out of that. We can even build in known scrap. I mentioned that real quick when I was doing the cost roll-up. In the bill of material, if we know we have scrap involved, we can capture that. In fact, we have a client that make feed for like cows and chickens and stuff like this. So they literally have these massive silos of grains outside of their plant. And they have these vacuum systems that will draw off of these. But as you can imagine, you take cracked corn and dump it into a silo, and there's literally tons of it in there. The stuff at the bottom starts to get crushed. Well, they know what their scrap rate is. They lose about 1%. So they have built in that 1% scrap rate into their bill of material, so they add that into their overall cost. So they're picking it up. They're actually consuming the material, and they're passing along that cost to their clients through their cost of sales. Manufacturing job costing can help extend that cost picture out and allow us to really start to track how much it's costing us to make things. One last quick example. Worked with a customer that makes equipment. We'll call it automation equipment for the industrial environment. And each piece of equipment is unique in and of itself, but all of this stuff is the same basic stuff. Maybe different sizes, that sort of thing, to adapt it to a particular automation scenario. So what they would do is they would create a new product for the customer, and they would copy the bills and the routings over from the standard one that's similar, and then they would go ahead and tweak it for that particular job. They would roll up the cost. That becomes their cost estimates. They would quote the job based on that, but they left some wiggle room in. That wiggle room allowed them to adjust price up or down based on final cost within reason. There was always a percentage higher, low. And the idea was at the end of the job, they would take all of their collected data and figure out what they should be charging for this thing before they invoice it. The problem was in reality, they were tracking all this stuff on paper initially, which was later being transitioned into spreadsheets, and just the time that it took to do it was just absorbent. They couldn't really work in the environment they wanted to doing it that way. So the owner's daughter would come in over the summer when she was out of school, in high school and then in college, and she would spend the summer transposing all the costs from the prior months since the last summer. It's too late to do anything about it now. We helped them transition to a point where they were able to actually capture those costs as they moved through the processes, so that they could look at their job summary at the end, see what it really cost them before the thing ever shipped, so that they could adjust their pricing if it made sense to do so. And they were good about going up or down within that percentage, by the way. So if they came in really good on it, they would drop the price a bit. All right, so all of this is said and done. Going back to where we started, the idea here is to increase your overall profitability by identifying those underperforming products and bringing them into a position where they are performing where we expect them to be. At the very least, we're going to increase our profitability. Get better at this. We're going to get better at quoting if we are a company that quotes. We're going to refine our quoting systems to a point where they are more accurate. We're going to get a more refined cost of sale, which is going to give us better accounting, and so on. It really takes us all the way through, and it positions us, even in a situation like today, where, as I said earlier, we've had a whole lot of uncertainty introduced over the last several weeks. It provides us with a basis from which to work and start to make some intelligent decisions as to how we want to pass along cost to a customer, if we want to pass along cost to a customer. If we know we're doing really well still, maybe we eat it, maybe we eat part of it. If not, well, maybe we're passing the whole thing along. But if you're not really sure, kind of hard to make an intelligent decision. So all of that said, I'll tell you, get started today. Contact your Passport partner. If you don't have one, give Dave Dorsey a call. He's the one that did our little intro today. It's 800-969-7900, extension 145. Or you can reach out to Dave at ddorsey@pass-port.com. I'll leave that up on the screen. I'll throw this open for questions and see if anybody has any at this point.